The release of Sage CRM 2021 has seen an expansion to the RESTful APIs. New capabilities have been opened up because of the newly supported endpoints. The RESTful API Expansion has added endpoints that enable the management of document upload. We now have schema discovery. There are endpoints to discover what fields are contained in screens and lists, and what attributes and business rules are associated with those fields. This is going to be a really useful addition for people who are creating apps and portals. We've also added the quickfind endpoint, and this allows you to search for data across entities. We've exposed more user-based information, including preferences and settings, including the calendar information. And we've also published endpoints that mean escalation notification messages and can be shared from the Sage CRM into custom applications. And lastly, we've added the capability to perform batch operations. This lesson will provide a quick survey of these new capabilities. The documentation for the new endpoints is split between the developer guide and the REST API reference. The example usage of all the endpoints is given within a Postman collection that can be downloaded by following the links in both the development guide and the REST API reference. If you're new to Postman, then Postman is a REST client that can be used to create and execute queries, and the documentation includes a link to the Postman site. You can download the application from here, www.getpostman.com/downloads. Postman can be used as a SOAP client, which means it can also be used with the Sage CRM SOAP web services. As a client for the Sage CRM REST API is very useful as it enables us to use all of the different types of transactions enabled by the API, and this includes the ability to upload documents and files. The Postman app has the feature of saving requests that are made to a particular endpoint, and a Postman collection is a set of these saved requests grouped into folders. The help instructions within the API reference include how to import the collection files into Postman. Once you've imported the collection, it will look like this in Postman. The newly supported endpoints are groups in a subfolder within the collection, and the new endpoints are designed to use a session ID. This token needs to be obtained by creating a session, and this is done by using the SOAP web service. When using the new endpoints, a call to create a session ID must first be made. If the Postman collection provided by Sage has been imported, then the environment used within Postman will pass the session ID to each subsequent RESTful API call. When the Sage CRM REST API was released in Sage CRM 2019 R2, it covered the core entities within Sage CRM, and that included the library. Using the API, it was possible to view, insert, update and delete records in the library or document table. There was, however, a rather obvious gap in the API. There was no obvious way to upload physical files that the library records control. In Sage CRM 2021, we have added support for two endpoints that will allow documents to be uploaded and managed. The upload method is shown being used here. The file to be uploaded is attached using the Posts section Hidden File Upload field. If the upload is successful, then a status of success will be returned. The file upload endpoint allows only one file at a time to be uploaded. If you attempt to upload multiple files, then only the first will be processed. Note, the temporary file in which the file is placed has the same name that the session ID that is used to authenticate the post. Once the file is uploaded, it can be moved to its final library destination using server-side code, and that could be .NET, it could be ASP or other COM code using the file system object or equivalent. And this can be triggered, the movement could be triggered by a Windows event tracing. To remove the files from the temporary folder, you'll see that we have a particular endpoint. This will remove all files within the temporary folder created and used by the file upload. Sage CRM is a metadata-driven application. It holds the definitions of its screens in tables within the database. The database tables detail which columns should be included in which lists or screens. The power of Sage CRM's metadata is very obvious to partners and customers who have created customizations for Sage CRM using its .NET API or classic ASP API. The metadata does the heavy lifting. The code that a partner writes explains how to build the screen, but it is the metadata that decides which field goes where. The metadata determines the layout of the fields and determines which or how each field is displayed because of its properties. When the REST API was introduced, it provided a mechanism by which application records, company, person, can be viewed, inserted, updated and deleted. But there was no interaction with metadata. A developer could retrieve a record from the company table, but they would not know which of the fields needed to be displayed within a custom app or portal. Sage CRM 2021 R1 has added metadata discovery to the RESTful API. A developer can now read the metadata for a screen such as company box long and know which fields from the company table should be displayed when they are retrieved. The use of metadata separates the application code from the display code and should mean that it's easier to create apps and portals that access Sage CRM data. The Postman collection gives an example of how the endpoint is used. And you can start to see that by looking here. I've looked at the list object case grid. The result returns information on the case table and the columns that are included in the case grid definition in metadata. To help me explore this, I dropped the code that is returned, the JSON that is returned, into another viewer. And in this particular case, I use something called codebeautifier.org and their JSON viewer. Now I opened up the entity detail, and this shows the information provided about the table. I've closed up the details of the entity, and I can now see the properties of the case grid and its column. You can see here that I can tell whether the custom content property has been included within the definition and all of the properties of each field. Another aspect of schema and metadata discovery is the discovery of translations of captions. Sage CRM provides a multilingual interface. Out of the box, it provides a user interface translated into English, German, French and Spanish. A developer will need to be able to not just know about the database columns included in a screen or list, they will need to be able to present these to a user in that user's own language. And so this is why the Sage CRM 2021 R1 release has added translation recovery to the RESTful API. A developer can post a set of caption family data to an endpoint and have the translations returned. You can see here that we're using this service and then get trans. You can see the translations for the captions being returned for the current user. The metadata discovery methods of getCustomObject and getTrans, together with the other endpoints newly supported in Sage CRM 2021, should provide a developer with an invaluable resource for creating new extensions and integrations for Sage CRM. The new RESTful API extension has added the ability to perform a search for a string across company, persons, case, opportunity, lead, solution, communication, order, quote, and custom entity records all at once. This particular new endpoint, and here you can see I'm using this quickfind get results path, I'm searching for a string European time management. This returns all records containing the words European, time, management in any text field, email field, or URL field. The words can appear in any order within a record and across more than one field. The quickfind endpoint uses the settings that the main quickfind feature within the user interface uses, and this is all controlled underneath the administration screens. Here you can see I'm looking at Administration System Quickfind. When the Sage CRM REST API was released in Sage CRM 2019 R2, it covered the core entities. But although it provided for the ability to create, insert and update, it didn't provide information on how to work with more than one record at a time. Sage CRM 2021 R1 has added support for batch processing to allow multiple records to be inserted. The example within the Postman collection provided within the documentation shows how this batch endpoint is used. This is an extension to the Sage CRM resource post endpoint. And it allows a customer or a user a developer to post an array of records to that endpoint. And here you can see the example is using a posting of two notes records together. On completion, it returns a 200 status with an array of responses for each response request. And those responses are either going to be individually a 200 for a success response or a 400 with an error and diagnosis. The RESTful API extension has also provided the developer with two actions for retrieving information about a user's calendar preferences. The Sage CRM user data endpoint can be passed one of two related actions: get calendar user preferences and get calendar translations. If we look at get calendar user preferences first, the response to that is a JSON object that describes the user calendar preferences. And you can then compare that by looking in the help information that explains what those preferences are. If we look to now the get calendar translations, we can see that the response is a JSON object that provides the translations for each of the calendar captions appropriate for that user. And so that would be French or German or US English. Information about the translation is provided within the system administration guide, and the return data is always going to be translated according to the user credentials that we used to create the original session ID. And that's the session ID that is being used within the URL. Sage CRM has also in 2021 R1 provided a RESTful endpoint that will provide the developer with actions about notifications directed at the user. And these are the notifications that would appear within the Sage CRM user interface. This is using the same user data endpoint, but this time passing in another action. So we have get notifications and get notification options. If we look at get notifications, we can see that the response object is one that describes the current notification alerts for the user. And these are the notifications that would be shown in the top bar of the main user interface. And finally, we can look at get notification options. In this case, the response object is one that provides the translations for the notification captions used in the main user interface. These are appropriate for the user making the request, whether that's French, German, or whatever. This information is drawn again from the custom captions table within metadata. The purpose of this video was to cover the newly supported endpoints for the Sage CRM RESTful API. We've seen in this video how this expansion has allowed for the management of document upload, schema discovery. These are the endpoints to allow which fields are contained in screens and lists and all the attributes and business rules associated with those fields. We've seen how it's added in a quickfind endpoint, how it's exposed information from the user about their preferences, settings, and also about their notification messages. And we've also added in batch capabilities. Let's build great extensions for Sage CRM.